This is a Triple J podcast.
Are you the sweatiest person at your gym? I'm not calling you out, but let's just say you may have some bragging rights, courtesy of this week's science episode. I'm Lucy Smith. I was joined by Bianca Nogrady this week and Dr. Theresa Larkin to answer your science questions. Dr. Theresa Larkin is a friend of the show from the University of Wollongong who specialises in the human body. We get into a bunch of interesting questions. We also fact check or science check a Halsey lyric. And we also talk about the ways that we can combat misinformation, or at least take it with a grain of salt. Let's get into it. Bianca, so good to have you back in the studio.
It's very nice to be here.
And we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Theresa Larkin, friend of the show, who's been on before. You were also on the hookup recently, Theresa.
Yeah.
You are from the University of Wollongong, and there's actually a study or something that you're kind of looking into right now. Can you give us an update on that and what it's all about?
Yeah, so through all of the radio segments that I've done and just talking to different people, we realised that a lot of people don't know a lot about their body and in particular about their reproductive anatomy and reproductive functions. Now, obviously, having that information is really important for health empowerment across the lifespan. You know, we're thinking safe sex, consent, contraception, fertility, pregnancy, so many things from young people to old people. So we've actually designed a survey. It's super easy and quick. It's less than 10 minutes. It's all sort of, you know, pick your options to ask people about what they do and don't know about these things. Because honestly, for us, it's finding out what people don't know that's pretty much just as important, so we can then understand how best to communicate that, how to better educate our future medical doctors, what things maybe need to be more exposed during school or later. So, yeah, we'd love if the Triple J audience, young and old, would love to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. We can go to your Instagram to find more at Dr. Theresa Larkin, or just head to the University of Wollongong's website.
So at the moment, it's just on my Instagram page. So in the bio, Dr. Theresa Larkin. I don't know if we can put it on any notes or share it, but yeah, At the moment, it's not really at a UOW webpage. But yeah, we'd definitely love to hear from as many people as possible. So there isn't a study like it really out there. We want to get to 1,000. We're on 300 people at the moment.
All right, let's get that extra 700 because the beauty of this segment is that people can ask these questions in real time to you, but we kind of want to know where are those gaps in knowledge, right?
Yep.
Well, let's do it. What can you kind of answer today for us? You know, what are some of the realms that people can tap into with the human body?
So anything about the human body, I love it. So, you know, whether it's hormones or the immune system or what our muscles do or what the thyroid does, you know, anything like that. Sense of smell, pain, movement. Yes, so many things. Happy to be surprised. The heart, the blood vessels.
Hell yeah. Well, let's get into
what
it.
people are feeling.
Yeah. Dr. Theresa Larkin with you on Triple J and Bianca Nogrady. Let's get into it. We've got our first question from Mitch in Meanjin, Brisbane. Dr. Mitch, you're kicking us off. What do you want to know?
Good morning, doctors. My question is about blood. How does our body expel foreign DNA from blood transfusions, whether it's someone who's donated a while back and we've got the bag hanging, or person to person? How does our body sort of get rid of their DNA from that blood?
So the really useful thing about blood is that it doesn't contain DNA. It doesn't have red blood cells, which is normally what you get when you get a transfusion, a red blood transfusion, doesn't have DNA in it. Like it's got a variety of sort of immunological signatures on the cell's surface, and so those are things that are going to influence part of blood type, which is why you can't just give any blood to anyone. We actually have to look at what those signatures are and make sure that we don't give blood to somebody who's going to have an immunological response to it. But in terms of the DNA, there isn't DNA in there. So blood transfusions are actually quite interesting though, because we're coming to appreciate that in extreme trauma settings, obviously they are literally life-saving, but there is also potential, because you are getting something into your body that has a different immunological signature, that there might also be kind of some effects that we're still coming to understand in terms of possible, not harms, but not necessarily as 100% beneficial as we've thought of blood transfusions as being. So, but it's an area of exploration.
Yeah, it is really
Nice.
interesting that those red blood cells, as you say, they're pretty much the only cells in our whole body that don't carry a nucleus and a copy of our DNA. And it's actually, Mitch, because they're so tiny, they have to push through these little tiny capillaries so that they carry the oxygen to all of our cells. So, yeah, as part of that development, evolutionary in the process, they've gotten rid of their nucleus. And they only last about 3 months anyway, our blood cells. So I suppose that's another aspect in terms of transfusions. You know, the red blood cells themselves, they only live for about 120 days.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Didn't know that.
Great. Thanks, Mitch. We got
very much.
Grace in Wagga Wagga here. Grace, what's going on?
Hey guys, my question is, I am hot all the time after having a baby. I was a real cold frog before, but now just hot all the time. Used to sleep with a doona in summer, now can't sleep with a doona in winter. Just wondering, is there a physiological reason behind that?
Can I just say, I feel you. I had 2 kids and I remember like there'd be nights where I would wake up after they were born and I would just be dripping with sweat. I was so hot and it felt like it went on for ages. And like I like to be really snuggled under a doona, and it used to drive me nuts because I wanted to be snuggled under in the cold and wrapped up in this big feather doona, and then it would just be turning into this literal sauna. So
That's right.
there is a reason for it. It's a good reason. I'm going to hand over to our anatomy and physiology expert to explain it.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, it's so interesting how so many things change based on our hormones. And I guess in the case of, you know, after having a baby, you have so many energetic processes going on in your body. And so when we have extra reactions, you know, extra chemical reactions and processes, if you're producing milk and your body's going through a lot of changes, you're probably also sleep deprived. That's a lot of stress on your body. All of those things, all of those reactions actually have as a byproduct heat production. So basically you are heating yourself from within, as well as with those changes in hormones. You know, even during a menstrual cycle, when we have an increase in progesterone in the second half of the cycle, our body temperature can go up by half or 1 degree.
Wow.
Yeah. And you still got a good amount of progesterone after having given birth, even though it's not as high as pregnancy. But did you also find that you were super hot during pregnancy?
Absolutely, to the point where I would just be air conditioner on all the time, no matter where we were. So
Yep, that was your progesterone.
Oh my God, just a human stove, Grace.
And
super
they're
interesting.
dropping,
Thank you.
they're dropping estrogen as well. Is that because I'm just thinking, you know, I can talk about the pregnancy and then also being in perimenopause. It's like, why am I so hot all the time?
Yeah, and also it's sometimes the fluctuations, because the part of the brain that's dealing with those signals back to then monitor the temperature, sometimes it gets a little bit overwhelmed when we've got a higher level and a lower level, and it can take some time after giving birth for those hormones to settle out. But yeah, you're right, though, that drop for perimenopause and menopause, hot flushes as well.
This could also be in the same vein. Glenn from Port Stephens, what's your question?
I just wanted to know why, when I exercise, I tend to sweat a lot more than the other members of my family, even though I'm fitter than them.
Oh, subtle flex, Glenn. Even though I'm fitter than them.
I think that's your answer right there.
Yeah.
Because they actually do say that the fitter you are, your body is then more efficient at dissipating the heat that's produced with exercise. So, yeah, like you said, Lucy, it's quite a segue from the previous question. When you're exercising, you know, your body temperature goes up because you've got all these muscle contractions, and then we've also got an extra amount of blood, so not the same amount of blood, but it's being pumped around a lot more. We need extra fluids, and so we've got all of this need to dissipate that extra heat. Sweating is the number one best way for us to get rid of excess heat in our body. That's why our bodies don't have a lot of hair on them compared to other animals, because we needed to get rid of the hair follicles to make space for sweat follicles. So, yeah, maybe it is, Glenn, that you're just have become more efficient in that sweating. Did you used to sweat a lot before you were fitter than everyone else?
I can't really remember.
Yeah.
I just remember that I tend to sweat, and it's amazing, my daughter, she doesn't.
And just so interesting, different effects of hormones. Thyroid hormones can really play a role in our sweating. But, yeah, they do say that the fitter you are, the more efficient your body is at sweating to keep you cooler.
she's not going to like that answer.
The proof is right there, Glenn. And finally, we got Bree in Leichhardt before we take a track. Bree, what's your question?
Good morning, doctors. So my question is regarding smell. So we might have a block of tasty cheese or a block of Parmesan open in the fridge, and maybe it's been open for like 2 or 3 weeks, and I can start smelling this like pungent smell, so much so that I can taste it. I can taste it if I put the cheese on like a sandwich or if I grill it, but my husband cannot. And it's only happened like recently, I would say over the last 1 to 2 years, and I just don't know where this smell has come from.
So there could be a couple of things going on. It's generally, as we get older, our sense of smell gets less acute. So, which is obviously not what's going on here, but that's just a general note. So one thing that can change your sense of smell is pregnancy. And so up until the point where you said this has happened over the last 1 to 2 years, I was going to go, I was thinking
No, I can answer that, no.
But I mean, the reason, well, it changes in pregnancy. I'm not entirely sure why, but I guess there's probably a kind of an evolutionary defense mechanism in there to encourage us not to be eating things that are bad for us. Look, there are different things that can change your sense of smell. So I'm just sort of spitballing a little bit here. But I mean, for example, if you had COVID, and if COVID, because we know that COVID in a lot of people did influence their sense of taste and smell, and particularly people with long COVID sometimes lost that for an extended period of time, which is a result of neuroinflammation in the brain. So it may have been that if you got COVID, assuming that chances are pretty good that you did, that maybe what you're now experiencing is you may have actually had a slight loss of your sense of taste and smell during that time, not enough to really notice it, but maybe it's coming back. Or, I mean, this could also have happened with any other kind of viral infection. Maybe there was some kind of viral infection that slightly diminished your sense of smell, but now you've recovered. Those would probably be the main things I would speculate on. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same. You know, it's interesting to think whether Bree had sort of had a lessened sense of smell earlier and now it's coming back for exactly all the reasons that you said, or whether the partner at the moment, you know, he might have some inflammation in his nasal cavity or some blockages or a bit of extra, you know, even if anyone's got a bit of sinus, anything like that. But as you say as well, Bianca, like it's interesting in terms of the neurons in the upper nose, they're actually the only neurons in our brain or body that can regenerate during life. So if you had something that damaged them in the past, they may have grown back and been more effective.
Wow.
And that's exactly why we have increased sense of smell during pregnancy, so that we can detect any off odours.
Wow, super smell. Bree, thanks so much.
That's so interesting. Thanks, guys.
Let's get into this one from Ashley on Butjalong Country. Ash, what's your question?
Hi, doctors. My question was regarding whether or not there's a connection between hormones and our immune response, in particular allergies. My mum has sort of always had an allergic hay fever reaction to horses ever since she sort of started menopause 10 years ago. And now she's on HRT, it's kind of stopped. So curious to know if that's just a coincidence or whether there's a relationship there.
Bianca.
So there's a couple of things to comment on here. So first of all, women are much more likely than men to have autoimmune diseases. So things like hay fever, it's an autoimmune condition because it's your immune system essentially attacking the self, attacking you rather than attacking, you know, something like a bacteria or a virus that's not supposed to be there. So women generally have much more reactive immune systems than men, and one of the reasons, as I understand it, is that most of the genes for our immune system are located on the X chromosome, and women have 2 X chromosomes, and so we kind of get a double whammy of it. In terms of the hormonal influence on the immune system is an interesting one. Do you want to jump in? Have you got any thoughts on that one, Theresa?
Probably similar to things that we spoke about before in terms of, you know, hormones, and especially when we're thinking reproductive hormones. The key for reproductive hormones in females is literally preparing for a pregnancy. You know, whether that is what we do or don't want to do, that's our evolutionary sort of the purpose of them. So there is a lot of relationships between hormones, the immune system and stress. You know, stress itself is an additional interaction, because when someone's more stressed, then everything to do with sex is lowered, because from an evolutionary perspective, if someone's stressed or there's a stressful environment, and that might mean things about needing a heightened immune response, for example, then the body says, oh my gosh, we've got no reserves to have children in this. So yeah, there are lots of interactions between hormones, which can be affected by HRT, between stress levels and the immune response. So I'd say it's sort of that trio, the link between all three.
But in terms of direct effects on whether you're like over the course of your cycle, because I mean, if you're going to look at things like how your immune system changes, you'd be looking, I guess, at volumes of different immune cell, or not volumes, but numbers of different immune cells and how quickly they respond to a threat. And it's actually a really good question. I'm sure there's a lot of research on it. I'm not entirely sure in terms of how it would change over the course of an immune cycle, but over the course of a lifetime as a woman, and in terms of the changes that you experience in hormone levels, and this would potentially also apply to transgender women as well, that when you do get those hormones, whether that also then impacts and changes your immune responses. Really good question.
Thanks,
No
Ashley.
worries. Thanks, doctors. Thank
Yeah.
you.
We've got Jen from Malua Bay. Jen, what's your question?
Hi. I was just wondering. So I've got my spine fused. So I think it's a four level fusion on my spine, and I have the second bolt down on the left hand side. Always gets sore every single time it rains. Without a doubt, it can be up to a day before, sometimes 3 to 4 hours before, without fail. But it's only over that one bolt. So I was just wondering what may cause that, whether it's a pressure thing or why that one hurts and only that one.
Wow, Theresa. Can
Great
you speak
question.
to this?
Yeah, and absolutely your instincts are right in that one of the things that could be causing that is a slight change in pressure. So when there's, these different weather systems, there can be changes in pressure, humidity, temperature. Those things can affect our body. So, yeah, absolutely, if there's any additional swelling that happens, and especially if we think about the effects of temperature, so cold temperature can cause our muscles to be a bit more rigid, and that might pull on that joint. And if that's then a joint that's had, this surgery, there can be some inherent changes or inherent weaknesses. So it's interesting when we hear that, people say, I know the rain's coming, I feel it in my knees, and you can kind of think, how can that happen? But there's definitely some potential and some truth in it because of those reasons.
Wow. Bianca, anything to add?
Yeah, just also that when it's colder, which may not be the case with rain, especially if you're in Queensland, but the fluid that actually kind of is in between your joints and lubricates the movement of your joints, that can also just get a little bit thicker. So it's all just around sort of changes that might mean that because of the way that your bones were fused, there's just obviously a particular pressure point that is most sensitive to these changes, and that's what's giving you grief.
So interesting.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I was just wondering as well, because the joints in between, they actually use someone else's donor bone to fuse the whole entire disc. So the discs are actually removed as well. So, yeah, shout out to people who donate their bones during hip surgeries and things like that. They do help other people. So
I didn't even know that was a thing. That's fantastic.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Jen. Yeah, someone
That's
texting
okay.
in saying, wow, that is fascinating. Jacinda from the Northern Territory. Jacinda, tell us, you got a question about gestational diabetes.
Hey ladies, yeah, I recently heard that gestational diabetes can be influenced by the health of the baby's father. I was just wondering, is that true, and if so, why?
So I think the short answer is no. So gestational diabetes, I mean, I think there's a number of things that go into that. I don't know how well we actually understand why it happens. So maybe, Theresa, you can talk about what we understand about gestational diabetes.
Yeah, so the links with gestational diabetes, as far as I know, are pretty much all around the carrying mother. So actually during gestation, normally there are changes to the way our body uses insulin because it needs to prioritise glucose getting across the placenta to the baby, and also because then the mother has all these extra energy needs to grow the baby. So actually for anyone who's pregnant, there is the potential to get a diabetes. It's just whether that person's body can respond appropriately enough. and start to produce more insulin. So the things that then mean a woman might not be able to produce as much is already she might be a bit prone to having diabetes if they have excessive fat or are eating a lot of, and I know this isn't always the case, but these are things in the literature that contribute, or even, there's dietary impacts, not being active enough. But there are also people that I'm sure we all know who are all those things, who are not those things, who are fit, who are, small and exercising well, that also get it. So sometimes it's just the way the pancreas responds.
And the other thing that's important to know, which is a bit of an aside to this, is there's so much evidence now that the health of both parents, of a mother and a father, or the contributors to the baby, even before conception, their health is going to have an influence on the long-term health of the baby in terms of metabolic health. So there's an argument that, if you are looking to conceive, to actually really get on top of your health before you even conceive. Ideally, really get on top of it as soon as possible, because it's great for you as well as babies. But yeah, to actually, things like obesity and diabetes and overweight, if either parent is in that state, I guess, at the point of conception, those things can have quite a significant impact on a baby's lifelong kind of metabolic health, I guess. So it's really a case that we should all try and be, I guess, get on top of any potential metabolic risks that we have as soon as possible.
Yeah, right. No, that's great. Thank you so much, guys.
Great. Thanks, Jacinda. Now, I've got a question here from Christian in Baxter, Victoria. Christian, what do you want to know?
Hey, doctors. Thanks for taking my call. My question is a bit more about science communication, and I was just wondering, in my early stages of being a communicator, how can I avoid becoming frustrated or even upset so much when I encounter some opposition to the information I'm trying to explain to somebody, and when their position is coming sort of from a place of maybe misinformation or lack of understanding.
I can also imagine as science communicators, Christian, you're in it right now, but, Bianca, Theresa, you would have watched the emergence of the internet and the ease and access at which people can, spread this misinformation or have these opinions outwardly. This is an interesting question. Bianca, what's your advice?
Look, I really feel you on this one. And, I've been a science journalist for 20-something years. And, in that time, even just looking at something like climate change, you really see some massive shifts towards understanding, towards acceptance of scientific evidence. And then, what we're seeing now, particularly with Trump, is this massive shift away from that. We're seeing that, a huge rise in misinformation and disinformation and conspiracy theories around things like vaccines as a result of the COVID pandemic. There is a real issue now that there is a real rejection of expertise and rejection of evidence in favour of feel opinions. So, it is a tough time for anybody who is trying to, scientists and science communicators, who is trying to actually push back against that. But what I would say to you is keep going, because the way I view it, and I get into, I don't do it so much now just because I don't have time, but I used to get into great big fights on Facebook about climate change, about vaccination, in kind of just local community groups. And what I've come to kind of accept is that the people who are pushing back really hard, you will never change their mind, because they are not arguing from a place of evidence. Most people who are, getting in there and who are throwing this, this muck around, they will never be convinced by the evidence. It's not just a case of, if you show them the evidence, they will convince. Because it's a matter of identity for them. It's a matter of faith. It's got nothing to do with evidence. But what I would say is that really the people that matter in those conversations are the ones on the sidelines. They're not the ones who are arguing with you. They're the ones who are watching, who are reading what you say. And I view it as collateral benefit, that when I'm in there and I'm arguing, or even just with the stories that I write as a journalist, is I'm trying to reach those people who I guess you might think of as the uncertains or the undecideds. I'm not preaching to the choir. There's so many people who do accept the overwhelming evidence, shall we just say, for the safety and efficacy of vaccines and the overwhelming evidence for human-induced climate change and its impact. it's getting to people who want to know more, who want to understand more, who have genuine questions, who want to engage. Those are the people who are worth your time. Don't worry about the trolls because they're loud and they make a lot of noise, but they don't matter.
Theresa, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh,
I feel like
that
Bianca,
was, I think that was perfect.
Yeah.
That's my West Wing speech. How's that?
Also, I feel like, Theresa, you have noticed different trends on TikTok, for instance. We even got a question earlier. We'll have to see if we could get them on. Where when it comes to the wellness space, for instance, and things like cortisol, we're seeing that cortisol is dangerous. And it's been really great to see you jump on programs like The Hookup and talk about how sometimes when we see these trends, it's actually because these are normal bodily functions.
Yeah.
How's it been for you kind of seeing that emergence of the way that people can mask misinformation as wellness?
It's been really eye-opening for me, I have to say, because, I teach at a university and what I teach is what we know from the evidence, and I'm teaching people who believe me. And so it's been really eye-opening to see, though, what other people can portray as real and as evidence-based that isn't always. And, though I'm a scientist and absolutely I question things, I'm kind of a bit gullible in real life. I'm a bit of a believer. I want to believe in everything. And so I sometimes find it hard. I'll read something and think, oh my goodness, but then I have to think, that's actually not right. But it's kind of a good thing because it makes me have to check things. It makes me think you can't take that on face value. And obviously as a scientist, then I know what things to look up and what's not always right. But yeah, it's crazy the people that can try and convince you of things online and make it seem so real.
So stay vigilant. Christian, thanks so much for your question.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, we got Michael in Melbourne. Michael, I love this. What do you want to know?
Hey, doctors. The new Halsey album, or latest one, has a song called The Arsonist, and there's a line in the song that says, the father's DNA stays in the mother for 7 years. And I was just wondering how accurate that was.
I love it. I love it when we fact check a movie, fact check song lyrics. Bianca, is it true?
It is a great question. No, I think it's probably the shortest answer. So if we're talking very specifically, so let's say the father's DNA is sperm, that's not going to survive particularly long. I'm not actually sure how long sperm cells survive, but I mean, the female anatomy, reproductive anatomy, is not designed to hang on to this stuff. Unlike some other animals, bees, for example, like queen bees will store the sperm. They go out on one mating flight. They mate with as many male drones as they can, and they store that sperm for their lifetime, and they use it to constantly fertilize eggs. Humans, thankfully, do not do that. The sperm is there, does its job or doesn't do its job, depending on what the situation is. And then, I don't know, how long does it last, you reckon?
5 days.
5 days. So if we're talking specifics in terms of that DNA, no, definitely not there for 7 years. The other way that we were thinking about it might influence, so, if there's a baby that's conceived, that baby does have a long-lasting impact on the maternal, a lot of it impacts the immune system, whether or not, when a baby is born, pretty much all of the DNA, you would say the genetic material that is associated with that baby is ultimately removed or it's I want to say gotten rid of, that's not the right term, but it is, why do we say this? Expelled. There we go. We'll go with expelled. Yeah. All of that genetic material associated with the baby is expelled from the mother's body at birth. So there's not really anything that hangs around there. I mean, you could conceivably argue there's maybe longer term effects on the maternal immune system because, your immune system is altered by having a baby because you do have essentially what is a parasite growing within you, and that's going to have some long-term effects on your immune system. But in terms of that song line, no, it's not right.
Halsey, come on. But you know what? It is, I think, it has power, It's art. We got Brendan in Ipswich. Dr. Brendan, what do you want to know?
Morning, doctor. I'd like to know why we're such a genetically homogeneous species.
Oh, good question. And you're right in that all humans, I love this, it's fascinating, are 99.9% identical. So there's only 0.1% that differs between any of us.
What?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so this is a great question and a different way to think about it. So the thing is that even with chimpanzees, we share 98.8%. So the reason that all of us are, homogenous, even we can say across other animal species, is because most of those genes are encoding for basically our structure, the fact that we've got certain proteins and certain chemicals that keep us alive and that build bones and build skin, all of those basic things is actually what the majority of our DNA is doing. But it's crazy when we think that just that 0.1% different between all of us, but that's still 3 million base pairs. That's a lot of DNA. But that's actually what explains all our differences in what we look like, in how we respond to things, in what we call our phenotype. So not just things that we can see like our eye colour and our skin colour, etc., and our height, but other things like our disease risk and our metabolism and our hormone profile and our bone density. So many things like that are the 0.1%. But yeah, you're right. We can think that we're all very similar. Our similarities are way, way bigger than our differences.
Wow. Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you.
And finally, we've got Tash in Campbelltown. Now, Tash, you've noticed something when you're at a gig. What's going on?
Good morning, doctors. Yeah, so when I go to gigs that are high energy and I do a lot of jumping, I get pins and needles in my leg. And I never get pins and needles any other physical activity.
I love that you're jumping as well. Sometimes when they tell me to jump, I don't. Yeah, Bianca's doing it. I just
jump
kind
the
of
whole time. But...
Yeah. Tash, can you tell us what was the last gig that you were high energy jumping for?
Green Day in Sydney.
Amazing.
My daughter was at that gig.
Yeah. So when you're there, you're noticing you're getting pins and needles in your legs, did you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right after jumping for probably most of a song.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Go jumping. Great stuff. So what might be happening is, so often there's a couple of reasons why pins and needles can happen. One is that you've kind of, when you're sitting on your leg for too long and then you stand up and you kind of suddenly get blood flow back into the area. And actually, that's probably going to have to hit Theresa up for why that actually does make a prickle thing. But before I go to that, one thing that could be also going on is that when you're jumping up and down, you're compressing your spinal cord, your spinal column. And so sometimes that might just kind of cause a little bit of impingement, like on the nerves that then that go down to your legs, which can cause a little bit of tingling. Like, it's not a serious thing. Obviously, if you get sort of pins and needles chronically, for example, I used to, when I had a kind of a neck thing going on for a couple of years, and I'd get pins and needles in my couple of fingers because there was a nerve in my neck that was getting a little pinched. But that was sort of a more long-term chronic thing, whereas I think one thing that might be going on here is just simply that you're kind of jumping up and down, you're kind of compressing, the discs between the vertebrae and your back are kind of squishing down a bit, and it just might be having a little bit of an impact on the nerves that go down into your legs. I don't think it's anything serious to worry about. But then the other thing is pins and needles. I'm wondering if that might be going on here, Theresa.
Yeah, so the only other thing I can think is that jumping at a concert is a different thing. And, like you said, Jess, that's something that you don't get in any other activity. And so I wonder if it's because, when you say, for example, run, you're actually lifting each leg off the ground one at a time and you've got this real rhythmical movement. But when you're jumping at a concert, or when I'm not actually jumping very high off the ground. And so you've probably got a bit of swelling that happens in your feet. I'm not sure if that's something you notice, and that might also just be impacting the nerves as they travel back and giving them a bit of a sensation, like a little bit of inflammation, which can make it feel a bit pins and needle-ish.
And also, depending on if you're at a festival, but maybe you're on a hardwood floor, you're on concrete, that kind of thing. So it's just, you're jumping on not a very soft surface. But Tash, you know what? Keep on jumping.
Thank you.
We love it. Now, earlier we were talking about blood transfusions particularly, and you mentioned about blood not having DNA. We've gotten Simon, who's texted in saying, listen, you said there's no DNA in blood. What about crime scene investigators who say that blood matches a particular victim or perpetrator? We see it on TV, we hear it on true crime podcasts. But we're maybe paraphrasing here. Dr. Theresa, can you speak to this?
Yeah, so I guess we can clarify that there's no DNA in red blood cells themselves, but we do have DNA in, for example, our white blood cells that are very tiny part of blood. But the main thing with crime scenes, I'm leaving them here right now, Lucy, is, your fingerprints, bits of dead skin, cells, tissue, any saliva. We can get DNA from lots of other cells, just not red blood cells themselves.
Okay, great. The only crime here, Theresa, is if you are killing this science hour. We got Jess in Newcastle. Now, Jess, you've got a great question. What's up?
Hi, doctors. My question is about cortisol. I've seen a lot on social media lately about cortisol detoxes, and I'm just wondering, is that a thing? Is high cortisol bad for you? What's the go?
We were referencing this earlier, Jess. Theresa, what's the deal with the cortisol detox? Why are people recommending this?
Yeah, it's really interesting because poor cortisol does get the blame for a lot of things. So we all need cortisol. We all need to have a good stress response. And I think just what's happening is that on social media, people are associating maybe other symptoms of stress or depression or anxiety with things like, weight changes or sluggishness or tiredness or whatever, and thinking that it's just cortisol. The interesting thing is, though, a higher level of cortisol, we actually can't sustain that for a really long time. So definitely a higher level of cortisol can be linked to things like stress. But actually what often happens is that then we burn out our cortisol, and it's low cortisol that causes things like weight gain and other things. So we don't actually want to do a cortisol detox even if we could for some of those symptoms. But the best way to keep our cortisol healthy is actually to do things really in line with the sun and circadian rhythms, because cortisol is our body's natural alarm clock. It increases just before we wake up, and that's what gives us energy to start the day. And then it naturally lowers in the afternoon. So the best things about helping cortisol are then to do what we were meant to do from an evolutionary perspective, which was to eat and move, be active, do all of our big things in the daylight hours, not eat as much in the night, not look at screens in the night, and sort of that's our best way. So rather than a cortisol detox, I think we can still do a cortisol health kick, but it's not about lowering our cortisol. It's just sort of getting it back into a good rhythm.
That's great.
Does exercise help? I was wondering about exercise and physical activity. Does that help in terms of, I know it's good for us for a whole host of reasons, but how does that affect things like cortisol?
Yeah, that's a good question. So exercise is a great way to reset as well, because during exercise, our cortisol increases and then it healthily drops back down after. So anytime we do activities that can give us a little kick to cortisol in a healthy way, but then feel safe and, finish our workout or finish our exercise or come back from a walk and think, oh, that was nice and I feel better. That's actually a really healthy way to also, sort of give our body a healthy cortisol reset.
Does that help, Jess?
Yeah, that helps loads. Thanks.
Amazing. We got Janita in Marysborough. Janita, I feel like we've had a few baby childbirth questions. Janita, what do you want to know?
Hi, doctors. My question is, why, when you're giving birth, the contractions stop and start? Why is it just one continual contraction that gets the baby out faster?
Well, so interesting. I've never gone through it, but I can imagine that one long contraction would probably not be very nice anyway.
I'm dying here. Having gone through it twice, I can say I will pass on that one.
But it's really all about sort of the way that our muscles move when they're muscles, say like a smooth muscle, which is muscle that we can't actually control ourselves, such as the muscles of the uterus. So what happens during childbirth is as the baby moves slightly down, lower into the uterus, through the cervix, through the vagina, it stimulates responses to send back to the brain and say, yep, we're moving a bit more down, give us another push. And then the body does another contraction and it moves the baby down a bit more, and then there's more receptors further down that say, okay, baby's here now, move a little bit more. They also say that it's better for the baby too, because the baby's adjusting to each small movement, and we wouldn't want one continuous contraction because that might cause too much pressure on the baby's body. It might affect its blood flow. So it's kind of just the way that the evolution has decided that this is the best way to keep the mother safe and fittest through that whole process and the baby healthy.
Okay.
It also happens when you eat at the other end of operations, when you eat food, is that you actually, the action is called peristalsis. So when you swallow food, you actually have a kind of a rhythmic pulsing of your esophagus that's sort of, it's pretty much in the same way as a baby, instead of trying to push it out, it's trying to push it down into your stomach. But the same thing, it's kind of a kind of gradual contractions. It's not just one big, like a toothpaste tube standing on a toothpaste tube, which is not the best analogy to use, but we went there, so.
No, I like it. And finally, Ian in Geelong. Ian, what do you want to know?
Hi there. I have a couple of big wounds from an accident, and as the wounds have healed on my knee, they're itching like mad. What causes itching? What makes us itch? And I'm wondering, what's the difference between that kind of itch and the itch you get from a mosquito bite?
To be honest, all itching is linked to the one thing, and that's a chemical called histamine, which is why people take the antihistamines. And the itch is basically just telling us that those cells have been damaged, and it's sending a signal back to the body so that histamine can be released to try and heal. The problem is if someone scratches where there's an itch, that sets off a cycle. So then there's more histamine and it can be more itchy. So it's kind of an annoying pathway in our nervous system.
But the funny thing about scratching is that scratching feels good because it releases a neurotransmitter called serotonin in your brain. So which makes it even worse. Like, it's just one of those really stupid bits of the body. It's like, why does that do that?
Yeah.
Why does it that it feels itchy? It makes us want to scratch it, and then it feels good when we scratch it, and that makes it more itchy. It's just one of those quirks of the body that just doesn't make sense. But yeah, we've got it.
Why does it take so long for it's only towards as the wound is healing and like it's gone all hard, like, you know, where it cakes kind of. So while it was really soft and fresh, it didn't itch.
Yeah, often it's to do with as well, say, the dryness of the skin, and as the skin's healing and scabbing over, then that can also increase the perception of the itch capacity. And maybe previous to that, the other pain signals were stronger, so say deeper pain or sharper pain, and then as those subsiding, the itch can become more apparent.
Yep. Easy. Thanks so much, Ian. Dr. Theresa Larkin, thank you so much for joining us here on the Science Hour. If you have more questions for Theresa, or there's some stuff you don't know, you're actually doing a survey at the moment to find out where those gaps in knowledge are with the human body. You can go and take part via Theresa Larkin's Instagram at Dr. Theresa Larkin if you want to check out more. Theresa, we'll catch you soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you so much. And Bianca Nogrady, thank you so much. You've just wrapped about 5 weeks of us on the Science Hour together. We really appreciate you jumping on and covering for Dr. Karl.
It's so much fun. It's great fun to be here.
And we'll have to have you on with Dr. Karl one day. I feel like you're always his sub, but, you know, we've got to get you in the room together. You can check out all the episodes with Bianca Nogrady via the Science with Dr. Karl podcast. Bianca, we'll catch you soon, I'm sure.
I look forward to it.
I don't want to pick favourites, but I reckon that's got to be one of my favourite Science Hours that I've done here on Triple J. Such interesting questions. A big thank you to Dr. Theresa Larkin for joining us. If you want to check out the survey that she mentioned, we're going to pop a link for you in the show notes. And the biggest of thanks has to go to Bianca Nogrady. Filling in for Dr. Karl is no easy feat, but she's done it while he's been on sabbatical. You can listen to all her previous episodes via the podcast feed. And Dr. Karl will be back with you next week. I hope he's got lots of stories from his time in Italy. It's been looking so good, by the way. Go to his Instagram if you want to check out more, but make sure you are the first to know when that episode drops. Like, subscribe, rate, instant download, whatever you've got to do, and you can do it via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Triple J app, the ABC Listen app, and YouTube. I'm Lucy Smith. This episode was produced by Josh Brennan, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Dave Marchese here from the Triple J Hack team. Hey, if you love Dr. Karl's podcast like I do, you might enjoy the Hack podcast as well. Each day we bring you the news that matters to you, from the latest science on climate change to what's happening in politics and news around the world. The Hack podcast. It's your daily fix of the news you need to know. Get it wherever you're listening now.